All right, what is up, everyone? It's time to do the broadcast. So today, what I want to do is go through the overall market. We're going to go through CoinMarketCap, kind of look at what's going on with the market, give the macro viewpoint, and then overall give my sort of sentiment on where we're headed and ultimately what we can expect from the markets. So if you can see my screen, you should be able to see trading view and you can see the CoinMarketCap. Just let me know in the comments. And if you can comment and let me know that you can comment below to make sure that's not screwed up and I can see everything y'all are talking about in there. So that way I can get you. There we go. Tony Stork, let's go. We are here to do one thing and one thing alone: milk the market for as much as humanly possible. Now, with that being said, this is also not financial advice. I'm just some guy on the internet who has a suit and says words. So don't trust anything I say and don't trust anything anyone else says. With that being said, let's continue into the broadcast. So what I want to look at first is just let's take a look at the overall market. And one thing I like to look at here on a daily basis is the fear and greed index over on coinmarketcap.com. And you can kind of see where we're at. We're not even like full greed is when we're parabolic and grandma's asking about how she can get Uniswap and buy Pepe coin. So we're not quite there yet. So we're still pretty neutral. I mean, we haven't even gotten into really bullish phases where people start getting euphoric and insane. Like if you think about last bull market, we were about here and people were like, Bitcoin will never go down. It's always up only. It's a super bull market where nobody ever sells. And then it went all the way down here at the bottom. So we're kind of neutral. We're heading towards the area of greed. And so that kind of tells us that we're starting to move to more of a overall bullish sentiment in terms of where we're headed and where we're headed and where we're going. The other thing I kind of look at is Bitcoin dominance has been slowly going up. So I actually have that on trading view as well. So if we go into crypto, we've got Bitcoin dominance at 51%. That's pretty high, which means Bitcoin is kind of capping out and alts have been bleeding pretty heavily. And that's starting to change. We're starting to see a little bit of a difference. And we'll go through that today and kind of look at what's going on and why. So outside of that, let's take a look at the market over the past 7 days, Bitcoin's basically been sideways, no real major action. So nothing to panic over, nothing to jump up and down and get excited over either. ETH's up, ETH's basically sideways as well. ETH is actually starting to look pretty good. Most everything is sort of sideways. The only ones, and I put this on my Twitter. So if you don't follow me on Twitter, it's just twitter.com/Chandler SAF. But I put on my Twitter a few days ago that I thought a few coins, let's go back in here. I put on my Twitter that I thought that Comp, Aave, SNX, Maker, and like Lido would light up. And they absolutely did. And they're continuing to light up. And my theory behind this is when you look at like Compound, it's a lending protocol in DeFi. When you look at Aave, it's a lending protocol in DeFi. When you look at SNX, it's a derivative protocol in DeFi. MakerDAO is like the DAI stablecoin, another lending protocol. These are all protocols that people are using to enhance their liquidity to be able to buy more things and use more leverage as we start launching up in the market. So it makes sense that the protocols that are focused on lending would start to pump first. And last DeFi summer we had, before the big bull market hit, these things was absolutely insane. I think SNX went from like, let's just take a look at SNX. It went from, if we look all time, before the big bull market, it was sitting at like 60 cents and then it pumped to about 7. We went back down and its peak was like $18 to $20. And so we're sort of in a similar environment here to where we're kind of getting over this hump. Notice how there's similar trends. So we're getting over this hump where we have this initial pump and we're like, wow, it's so high. Then it goes down and then we get the initial first drive, which coincidentally was July. What month are we in? So then we had the big summer pump and then a dump through September and then a huge pump for this one through January, which was kind of the big peak of the bull market. So that's just something interesting to pay attention to. Patterns are king. And you look at the same thing with Aave. So these coins typically in the past, they kind of led the rally. So we can kind of look at these. And that's why I was looking at these as an important piece of the rally, because they kind of can create sort of a predictive environment on when alts will actually rally. Uniswap's been doing great as well. But before we get too deep into alts, let's take a look at the coins. Let's see if we have any questions coming through. There's Darlene. What's up, Darlene? Tony Stark here let's go. Dima, welcome. We got all the memes. Content promote, send me memes. All right, so big thing here. Let's take a look at the market. I kind of want to look at stocks overall. I don't know if anybody's been paying attention to stocks, but man, I've just been buying call after call after call after call, and it's just up only. It's been a legitimate, insane bull market in stocks lately. So when we start looking at like the Dow Jones or even the NASDAQ, when we start getting into here, let's turn off all these indicators. It's too messy. So when we start just looking at the stocks and kind of, let's look at the NASDAQ, it's just been up only. So what's happened was we had a peak back here in like November 2021, and then we sort of started to bottom out and die. We had a double bottom in 2022, and then it's just been straight up only. And one interesting thing about this is it's kind of been indicative of the overall stock market pumping. If the NASDAQ is pumping, typically the major stocks in the US stock exchange are pumping as well. It's kind of like the Bitcoin to all the stocks. So then when we come down and we look at like the US dollar, notice how the US dollar is the opposite. So typically what happens in a bull market, or typically what happens in a market that's up, the US dollar sort of plummets. Notice how the US dollar is kind of like double bottomed. So what could happen potentially here is now that the US dollar is double bottom, the dollar could pump, which would bring the market down. And that would be kind of indicative of like a recessionary period. But typically the US dollar isn't pumping when the rest of the market is pumping. Because why? The US dollar is a safe haven asset. This asset is where people run to when the market is in trouble. When the market is doing well and people want to actually earn, they don't want to hold dollars. So they go back into the market to take advantage of the big piece. One interesting thing that happened recently in stocks, and it's interesting because Bitcoin hasn't been following the same sort of pathway as stocks, but we had this correction, this tiny little correction, and now it's leading back up to retest this. So this will be a pretty interesting moment in the market for next week, because this is either going to pump back and challenge these all-time highs, or it's going to dump back down and challenge this and then come back down or fall through and die. So that's kind of what we're looking at the stock market. When we look at actual stocks, it's been insane. You look at SPY, basically an index, it's been essentially up only. So we're looking at Apple's on a tear. So US stocks, and if you understand how to do calls, even if you're just buying stocks, it's been hard to be wrong with this. We're kind of still here waiting for this fabled mythical correction that people are talking about. So when it comes, it comes. But for now, it's been an enjoyable aspect of the market. We look at everything. Everything looks quite good across the board. We aren't having any major problems. When I look at, I'm on the daily right now, but when I go over here and look at the weekly on stocks, we're way above the 50. The trend hasn't really changed yet. You could maybe call this challenging a double top, but you come up here, we're challenging the 50. You come up here, we're challenging the 50. Everything is just on a tear. Nvidia was one of the most incredible call opportunities in a while. It could be potentially overextended, but only time will tell in a healthy market. So let's check some questions. Any SEC news? Yeah, SEC basically said that they needed more info for people to be able to get their spot ETFs approved. And the second they put that, we were kind of peaking above 31K, it dumped immediately down, but then got sucked right back up. So essentially the SEC put out information that was bearish and it dumped the market, but the market completely absorbed it right off the bat. So that was kind of good for us. Let me know, can you all see my screen? Just to double check. Give me a yes, if you can see my screen. What do you mean by prop companies? Let me know in the comments. All right, so let's take a look at crypto, because I think that's why everybody's here, seeing what's going on with the market. So I have a few different charts that I use for crypto. So I use this one for my short-term stuff, and then I use this one to map out longer term, and I keep this one as a clean chart. Check it out. This is the reason that I know where all of our entries are and where I can map out like profit zones. This is completely unreadable and illegible from a long-term standpoint. So when I look at this market, I really need to get granular with this so I can understand like where these profit zones are, because I kind of map out key resistance and profit points across the board. So when we look at where we're at right now, we'll go to the 4-hour. It's essentially sideways. So what we're basically doing is we're holding this like 30,003 kind of. We lost it today, but it got sucked up immediately. So now we need to get back on this. So we're kind of holding 30,000 300-ish, and we're kind of getting rejected against 31,000 right now. One of the calls that I talked about is if we break this, we have the opportunity to pump up and to move into the next phase of the market. One of the things you'll notice, though, this isn't critical to necessarily hold. The big critical piece is this 31,000, sort of this 31,000 area. We're basically stuck between 30K and 31. So that's kind of the zone right now, the sideways zone. If we go and we look at the macro, one thing that I encourage everybody to do here is to look less at the short term and to look more at like the macro, like what is the market doing and why. And I think a lot of times people, like if you think about what we did inside the dude server, we just don't really do much throughout. We did a little bit throughout here, but then we essentially caught the long from here all the way up to here. That was a banger. And so what happened? Well, we were patient, waited, we were snipers, and then we just went boop, and then take profits and get out and just wait for it to go sideways again. Here's what a lot of people do though. They get in, they short, they get stopped out, they short, they get stopped out, they get sideways, they lose all their money. Then by the time they get here, they give up and quit, then they miss the long. Then they do the same thing here. They're going through it. They're like, okay, we better short. Then they short, then they get stopped out. Then they try to short again, get stopped out. Then they decide to put in a long, get stopped out. And so it's like the opportunity cost of trying to short the market just doesn't make a lot of sense here. It does make sense if we lose like key zones. I think I mapped out in the server somewhere around like 29.2 because that's a pretty big pocket. But for this, it makes zero sense to go in here and murder yourself to try to short the market because it's just the risk versus reward isn't there. Versus here, this took us what? June 20th to June 21st. We shorted for 2 days and made all the money that we ever needed to make in the market. Then we just sit here and smoke $100 bills until this pumps. And then we do it again. So for me, it's like, it doesn't really matter that if I catch anything good in here. All it matters is that I catch the next leg up. So that's all I'm paying attention to and all I care about. And that's kind of my philosophy in the market. If I'm focused on the chop, I'm going to get eaten alive. I'm going to lose all my money. I'm going to just get completely wrecked. And then I have to make sure I maintain points of confluence to be able to hit the long when it does actually peak out and move forward. So when we look at this from sort of a macro standpoint, what we're looking at is, like I said, we're kind of waiting to break this zone from 31.78 to about 31.5. If you look on the macro, we look pretty good. I mean, you look over here, we have the 4-hour zone. I talk a lot about the 50 on the RSI being kind of a good indicator of a trend continuation if it comes back up, or a trend change if it falls below. So if it falls below, then we have a case for maybe a bear case coming in terms of the 4-hour time frame. If it comes down and pops back up and pushes, then we have a case for the bull continuing. And when we look at the points of confluence across the board right now, even with this giant dump here, which pushed us below, notice how this had a really big spike right here. So we've essentially absorbed the entire thing and came back up. Now we're challenging the 50 again. So now if we're able to challenge this and maintain this upward momentum, this is going to confirm and push us back up, which maintains the bullish case long term. And so when we look at this on the daily, it's going to be a similar situation, similar story. So we have this where essentially we're way above the 50 on the daily. We're kind of coming right here. We're challenging this. Not much has happened here, but we're still above the 50. We were able to peak out and kind of move back. So this tells me we're still sort of in a macro bullish environment, even with today's ridiculously bad candle. Same thing on the weekly. So when we look at the weekly, we're stuck right here. And so when you look at the previous support we lost, and this is why I kind of had these mapped out a little bit, this previous support we lost was right here, essentially this little zone. So that's essentially exactly where we're stuck. And that's how you sort of map out. One thing I recommend people do is make these kind of horizontal lines. Don't play with vertical lines. It's too easy to screw up the drawing. And if you do, then you screw up the whole momentum of what you're doing. But all I look at is, okay, I'm on the weekly. What makes sense? Like, okay, we lost a lot here. We came back up and retested. This is going to become resistance. Okay. Oh, guess what happened? This became resistance. Same thing when we come up here. We're like, okay, well, what could possibly be resistance on a big resistance piece on the way back up? Well, when we look at the weekly, we're looking at like right here, 37,500. So that could be a point that when we make this breakout that we're kind of shooting for, that 37.5, maybe even 36.1-ish. That would be a zone that we would see sort of a rejection on. When we come back down, we try to get support back right here to continue the cycle. So what I see from the macro viewpoint is we essentially obviously dumped. We went into this horrible bear market where we all cried tears of sadness in our showers. And we hit the bottom, we hit the next bottom, and then that allowed us to peak out. We got rejected off of this long-term trend line, which guess what, right here, we got rejected there before. And then we came back down, wicked it, and that gave us this big piece where we kind of all caught this and popped right back up. Then we went into this sort of downtrend for several weeks, which was nothing. And this is another thing where I say, like, instead of sitting in this for, how long did we sit in this horrifying downtrend? April 10th until June 12th. Instead of sitting in this chop and like killing yourself to make a long or hopefully make a short, all you do is position yourself to wait for this next move, position yourself to wait for this next move, to wait for just even this move, but wait for this next move that pushes us to this zone. And guess what? This next move will happen. And when it happens, we'll be out of it in 2 days. So my big philosophy behind this is look at the macro and recognize where the macro is headed so you don't get killed and lost in the chop here. So that way, all you have to do is trade 2 days, 2 days, 2 days, and you're in and out. And then we smoke $100 bills while we let everybody else get chopped and murdered in here. So let me know if there's any questions in the comments. When graph of my life will be bullish? All you got to do is look up, put one head in front of the other, and then say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this happen. Oh, I think FTMO is great. If you can pass the test, you get a funded account. I think you keep 80% of your profits and you're essentially trading with their money. You've essentially proven yourself and the opportunity to be able to trade. So I do think it's a fairly good opportunity if you get it. What do I think the next BTC move be after moving sideways? Bear or bull and perfect signals will be available. Also mind me, but how long time duration we should expect till BTC makes another move? I think the next move, macro, to me, the next move is likely going to be a push to like, probably like right here. This 37,000, like maybe 700 will be conservative. Maybe like 37.4. If we really push, maybe it pushes us to like, maybe right here, 38.5, somewhere in that zone. I think that's our next push. In terms of how long, what happened here, we had a good breakout on this downtrend. So we had this weekly, we had this breakout here that we caught, which put us into this downtrend. This downtrend broke out and pushed here. So now what could happen is we could have this breakout in the next couple of days, or we could sit sideways for another couple of weeks before pumping. I would imagine, in my opinion, that June will likely see a pretty significant pump. And then I think we'll essentially go sideways through August, and in September, we'll probably see a pretty good sort of rejection or a dump. Just historically, when we look historically on the market, like let's look at the monthly. Historically in the past, when we look at like June, so let's go over here. Previously, we had like March, April, May, green. June, historically, 2020 was red, or that's green. Yeah, June's red. And then August or July was a big pump. So we have seen a green June. So maybe that, in my opinion, that brings us most likely a green July. I often see September being the month where we get catastrophically destroyed before we actually move into a legitimate bull market. So that would be my idea or opinion. We'd essentially move sideways to a little bit of June, then we'd pump through. We come back down through August and September and just move, and then all of a sudden it goes into full-blown bull mode because the halving happens next year. So I would imagine if we follow the halving cycle, that January ends up being a pretty big month, and we have a good December as well. And then that kind of extends into the sort of the following year, and we move into these double tops and all that stuff in the future. But that's projecting. Based on where we're at right now, notice how, here's another good point of confluence to pay attention to. We dumped hard through this, obviously. We lost the 50, so that tells us that we have bearish momentum. And then we came down here and stayed under this in the land of despair for a long time. And then we actually pushed through. And notice on the monthly, we came down here in May and we tested that 50 zone. And now we're pushing back up. So this is actually a significantly bullish segment of the market that's happened here. So this tells us that the monthly is even pushing bullish, which is really interesting. And that should give us the idea that we can maybe likely push up and then push back down to retest it. So that could even give us, we push up into September, and then through September, we retest it. And that gives us some momentum to keep driving back up into the new year. Some interesting things that are happening. I think ETH has a fairly bullish case right now. When we look at ETH, just have to deal with the lines. When we look at ETH, it's essentially, let's go to the weekly. It's pretty primed for a good move. When we look at ETH, it's kind of sitting right here. Its resistance is like 1928 to about 1940-ish. Once we clear that, then I wouldn't be surprised to see ETH do a pretty bullish move up to like we could move back up to like the 2120 zone. Because as you can see on the weekly, there's not really a ton of resistance. There's like 2018, and then there's 2112, 16-ish, all the way through there. That's kind of the zone I would expect, maybe a little pit stop at 2045, but this is kind of how I plan trades too. So it's like, once we clear this, what is available? We essentially literally died right there. So once we get through that, we can move to the daily and sort of map out where our profit zones would be. And for me, that would be moving in here. It's like, okay, we break that. What's the first profit zone? 1995. And I wouldn't put it right on there because that's where everybody's going to do it. I would be like 1987. And then, okay, what's the next profit zone? Well, let's see. We could say 2016, final profit zone, a little down, 2056. And that puts us 3 good profit zones to get out of the trade before it could possibly reject with significant resistance and chop. Looking at some of the other coins that I think are priming and getting ready to move well, we've got Matic that is getting close. So Matic had a lot of bad news, but then when we look at the sort of even the 4-hour chart on Matic, it came down and tested that 50 zone, pumped right back through it. So now that we see Matic moving through like the 50 and retesting it and looking bullish, that's a great sign. Then we move to the daily. Same thing, it's getting close to retesting that 50. It's not quite there yet. If we wanted to be ultimately extra careful, we'd wait until Matic crosses on like the weekly. So it's still got some room to go on the weekly. But then when we take a look at like Polkadot, for example, it's not close either. So when we look at Sol, it's getting there, getting closer to a good sort of buy zone. Once we clear the weekly, that gives you significant points of confluence that we could actually be heading into sort of a bull drive for some of these coins. Ones that look really good, Litecoin right now looks really good. Litecoin, as you can see, crossed on the 50. And notice how we like, we're dead, cross, pump, because this is one of the biggest indicators we can see that's going to say, hey, we can actually drive up and we can pump. So now Litecoin looks good. It's got big, giant, beefy candles because it crossed over. Another one that's starting to look good. Let's find it. Comp is on a tear. So same thing again with comp. It's like we die. We start crossing over. We cross that 50 and then we get a God candle. Aave is a similar situation. And this is why I call these out on my Twitter channel, or my Twitter profile. So make sure you follow me on Twitter if you don't. But same thing with Aave. Look, it's just about to cross that, what does that mean? If we cross that 50, guess what happens on the next candle? We get a God candle for Aave and we pump from $70 to $90. So that becomes another bullish case to drive into. SNX is a similar story. Look how close it is to passing. And then when you look at SNX, I kind of drew out the sort of the challenge zone it needs to get through. But once it crosses there, guess what happens to SNX? We get another God candle. And guess where that pushes us to? Like $2.83 up to like $3.11. Same thing with like MakerDAO. Maker's another one I was talking about that looks really good. It's the same case. It just crossed over. So now that it has a crossover, we're starting to build that God candle that's coming through. So this is kind of what I look for when I'm looking at the macro viewpoint. It's like, I don't necessarily care what it looks like short term. I see how this has a rejection. This scares me. Maybe I wouldn't get into uni at this point because it's kind of peeling down. So that tells me maybe this one needs a little more time to cook in the market. Now, if I didn't look weekly and I was like, well, let's go look at the 5-minute chart, it's a complete disaster and I'm going to get lost in the chop, lose my mind and probably not even make the trade or make a bad trade. So that's why when I look at these things, I'm looking at, okay, what is the opportunity for more of a longer term time frame trade that I can make that's going to put me in a position to make significant profits and not have to sit here and try to like somehow last through this chop. And it's like, oh, I'm in a long, oh no, I got short. I'm in a long, short. And then all of a sudden I die and I'm crying in my shower because I lost all my money at this point. I'm saying the market's dead. Nobody can make anything. Crypto's dead. It's not dead. You just didn't make the right decisions. Let's see if there's any questions. Yeah, you're welcome. I'll keep those signals coming. So as we kind of start moving through, like Lido, I picked up some of this morning. Notice how it crossed through on the bullish one. Everyone probably wants to know about this one, Pepe. Look at Pepe. There's not enough data here to really show anything, but let's go to like the daily. Notice how Pepe actually was absolutely 100% dead down here. And then now Pepe's actually crossed the 50. It not only crossed, and notice how after we crossed, we had the God candles come out. Then Pepe came down and it retested the 50. And now it's pushed back up. So what does that tell me? That tells me that actually Pepe is probably a bullish case. If there was a meme coin that I was going to hold into the bull market, it would be Pepe. It wouldn't be Doge or Shiba or any of that stuff. It would likely be Pepe as the next big thing. But it's also showing to be a bullish case in terms of how it's moving long term. So let me know if there's any questions. Big things that we look for are long-term catalysts. So when we're looking at here, the reason this is so choppy is because this was super choppy. So then we're right here, we're kind of stuck in this chop again. We've already created a new all-time high for 2023, a 2023 high. Now we're kind of just waiting for this to make the next move. And macro for me, because on the daily, we're essentially above the 50. On the weekly, even the monthly, look at that, we peeled through. So we're above. On the weekly, we've hit it and pushed back through. These are all things that give me confidence that we could potentially take the next step up. Macro. Now that doesn't mean micro, that we go from here and we maybe come down here and then we push here and then finally make it through this thing. It just means that macro, the next place that I'm looking for to take a good position is from here to up here. And when we take these positions, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like 100x long all the way through these little things. You could be 3x long. You could just buy spot. You could buy spot here and sell here, buy spot here and just buy and sell. You don't necessarily have to have ridiculously insane leverage when you're kind of doing that, when you're doing these trades. Mind me asking, but what does the 50 signify and why does the chart have to stay above 50? So yeah, 50 is essentially, so this is the RSI when we're here. So the RSI is telling us sort of what the strength of the market looks like and where it's headed. So if you notice, the RSI kind of follows the market, and the RSI can tell us right here, notice how this was like a sort of a peak indicator. So we can tell that we're probably going to try one more, and then we can see we have a little divergence on the downside that's moving us down. So then we hit the 50, and then that's the change. So what it really is telling us is, where is the trend heading? If the RSI is moving this direction, the trend is up. If the RSI starts heading this direction, the trend is down. So in the most simplistic terms, we can essentially follow the charts and watch what the RSI does. If the RSI keeps moving down, it's a dead market, it's a short market. But if the RSI starts moving up, it's a long market. And one of the things that we look at, and because we want to pay attention to sort of the trend, we have like the 50 being sort of a middle ground. So we've got 50 right in the middle. And this tells us that, okay, in the middle ground, if we just stayed here the rest of our lives, we wouldn't get anywhere. But if we went down here, now obviously the market's trending down. If we move above it, the market's now trending up. So it kind of gives us another point of confluence on which direction the market wants to head, and tells us whether or not the market is going to continue heading that direction based on the moves it makes. So let me know if that makes sense. All right. So kind of from my perspective, things look fairly bullish across the board. We haven't had any major, I mean, we even had the SEC thing today that didn't really crush us too bad. We sucked it up fairly quickly. Crypto looks good. I would say stocks look good across the board. It's like absolutely insanely bullish when we look at stocks across the board as well. It's an up only market. Look at Apple. Apple is absolutely just crushing it. So I would say right now we're in a market to where I'm fairly bullish. I've kind of shifted from the bearish mindset I had for a long time and moved into more of a bullish mindset as we move into this next phase of the market. And I think what we're getting into long term, when we look at like the macro, we're kind of moving into essentially maybe like this little phase right there, where we have a little pump, and then after August we dump and we test this, where we tested this trend line, And then we move into like November, December, January, where it starts to really move well. The interesting thing we'll find is as it starts moving, BTC typically moves first. And then when BTC corrects, alts go parabolic. Then BTC goes up and alts correct. BTC goes down, alts go parabolic. So we'll kind of probably see sort of a trend like that. Litecoin, one of the oldest coins, as you can see, it's obviously peaked out a few times, but same thing, it kind of moves into like a January, March, April sort of peak. So a little bit after BTC. So at this point, I think for me, I'm starting to feel like there are some alts that are heating up. I'm not saying that it's super important to go out and buy everything. I think it's good to build a case of alts that you can hold and that aren't going to put you in a horrible position. For me right now, it's like 50% Bitcoin, 40% ETH, and then I'm accumulating like 10% of alts. So I'm accumulating things like Compound, Aave, SNX, Maker, Lido, stuff like that, and a little bit of Pepe, just to have that for the bag as we move forward. I have a ton of Litecoin, and then ETH and Bitcoin as sort of my biggest bags because they're the two safest bets that allow me to hedge the market. All right, any last questions? Oh yeah, Nvidia went insane. Check this out. That was one of the greatest calls in the history of the world. So there's calls and puts on the stock market, which is essentially longing and shorting the market. But Nvidia, let me find it. Nvidia was one of the greatest moves right here. This looks like a Bitcoin chart. It just went absolutely parabolic for like an entire week right here, just straight up. So from like 307 all the way up to where it's at now, it was absolutely insane. It was one of the greatest moves. I think maybe Nvidia on the weekly, it could possibly correct to like right back here to clear this inefficiency candle, but it's still insane. And it peaked because it had the bullish news associated with AI. So it's one of the leaders in AI. And as AI became a case, obviously the AI associated coins or coin stocks became a good case. All right. Make sure if you're watching this, there's a few watching this, make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. If you're not following me on Twitter, follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/ChandlerSAF. And if you want to hear my calls, the only place I call and actually talk about things is in the Dude server because it's the next best thing since individually wrapped American cheese slices. But that's it. That's all I've got to say for today. If you are watching and you want me to look at a coin or anything like that, just drop the coin down in the comments and I'll take a look at it real quick. I'll look at pretty much anything. It doesn't really matter. As long as I can find the chart, that we'll take a look and I'll tell you whether or not I think it makes sense, whether or not I think it doesn't make sense. In terms of where I'm at in this phase of the market, I'm really only interested in maybe like the top. I'm interested in coins that are associated with DeFi, like Aave, lending protocols, or I'm mostly interested in like the top maybe 10, like the big caps. So if something's got bigger than $1 billion market cap, then I'm probably interested in it. Outside of that, the meme coin that I would hold right now is probably Pepe. But for me, it's like Bitcoin, ETH, Litecoin, I'm fairly bullish on right now. I think Polygon's picking back up. It's getting close, but it's not quite there yet. Bitcoin Cash has gone insane. It always does. Even though it has no purpose or anything, it always ends up being one of those coins that you wish you would have grabbed. When we look at like AVAX isn't ready, Sheeb isn't quite ready. Most of these aren't ready. Link actually has a decent case. It's a horrible performer in the market overall, though. Uni looks pretty good. Ethereum Classic's another one that has like zero case, but somehow ends up pumping super hard at every market. I like Lido right now. I think ARB is pretty close when we look at ARB. I like Aave. Aave looks pretty good so far. Optimism's almost there. Phantom's not quite there. ApeCoin's not there. Bitcoin SV, another one that literally has, I guess, no purpose, but ends up being one of the top performers in every market. Maker, I like a lot. I think Immutable is getting pretty close. Pepe, I like Pepe. Synthetics is getting pretty close. And we look at their market caps. It's kind of where you can see what the potential upside is. It's like 608 million. So SNX probably moved to like maybe like a $5 billion market cap. So you could say, okay, that could be the potential upside from where it's at now to kind of predict where it could possibly go. Compound I like. Look at that, 84% in 7 days. All right. It's been real. It's been fun. I'm going to do this next week. I'm going to try to do this stream every Friday. Hopefully during the stream, we can catch some like serious longs. Hopefully one day it just goes parabolic. But let me know in the server. Let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter what you want me to talk about in the next stream. I'll talk about that. We'll go through everything. We'll make sure that we can all win in the market. Remember, it's not financial advice. I'm just some guy that everyone calls Tony Stark talking on the internet. So I will see you all next week. What's up, Green Ranger?